So the war itself is only about 10 weeks long. We declare war in April. We are out by like July. The first shots of the war that we've declared on Spain and Cuba happen in Manila Bay in the Philippines, which is 9,000 miles away from Cuba. And if you're wondering how that happens, well, you should just know that this is how things are. This is what we do. And again, we know our Navy has been built up a lot, but it's not tested. We've built it up, but it has yet to actually been enacted in a war. So we don't know how well it's going to hold up. And we don't have that many men enrolled in the military. There's less than 30,000 soldiers total. And not all of them are sailors. So we don't know how this is going to hold up. And if you're going to go to war, you need people to fight. So any good president calls for a good American to volunteer. 1 million men volunteer. Nearly 10,000 of those men are African American men, and they volunteer despite segregation and the violence that they face, not only on the bases, but within their units once they are deployed. And the government is super grateful for this. Hey, awesome, thanks. But the government is also super unprepared for this influx of men. They do not have the ability to supply so many. So we don't have food, uniforms, vaccines that are necessary. And so most deaths from the Spanish-American War are going to come from malnutrition and diseases like malaria rather than the actual battles. And so again, we need to go visit why are our first shots fired in the Philippines? Well, we know that the US is looking for markets in Asia. And so Teddy Roosevelt, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Navy at the time, he has ordered these ships to attack the Spanish fleet that is stationed in the Philippines. That's why our first shots are in the Philippines. And Teddy Roosevelt is about to leave his post as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and he is going to volunteer as a lieutenant colonel in the cavalry back in Cuba. So his last act before he resigns from his post is to attack the ships in Manila Bay. He's not going to be there, might as well, right? So Commodore George Dewey sets the order to attack the ships, and they do, and he takes the victory. He sinks all the Spanish ships. They capture Manila, and Spain surrenders over in the Philippines. Meanwhile, back in Cuba, we've got 17,000 troops on the ground in June. There's not a lot of resistance there, but there is some fighting in July. Most of it's going to be fought in and around the area of Santiago. And this is where Roosevelt will go once he leaves his post in the Navy and becomes a lieutenant colonel. He is going to lead the group called the Rough Riders, which is an all-volunteer cavalry unit made up of college graduates, veterans, and cowboys from the Southwest. And these men are famous for charging up Kettle Hill and charging up San Juan Hill and capturing Santiago. And they get all the credit for the American victories in Cuba. But it is super important to note that there are several African American regiments that are equally as responsible for this victory, who helped out secure these spots so that the Rough Riders could take those hills. And the Rough Riders get all of the credit while the African American regiments get none. But it is super important to note that without these black men helping, the Rough Riders wouldn't have been able to do it. They needed these African American regiments. And once they've captured these hills, Spain attempts to flee back into the sea, and the American Navy blockades Spain and prevents them from escaping, and they sink every single Spanish vessel that was there. And so without naval support, Spain loses control of Puerto Rico because they are unable to resist the American forces that are in the general area. And so by the end of July, the war is over. Fewer than 350 soldiers died in combat. 1,600 are wounded, but almost 3,000 men die from disease. And to wrap this war up, we're going to get what you should expect, a Treaty of Paris. And this Treaty of Paris is supposed to grant Cuban independence. It's going to give the U.S. Puerto Rico and Guam. Spain is going to get $20 million from the United States in exchange for control of the Philippines. And Americans are going to see this as a victory of America. It's the first time we are going to reunify as America. and no longer North and South because of the Civil War. So it's been about 50, 40 years since the Civil War. This is the first time Americans start to see each other as a collective unit again, rather than just enemies of the Civil War. But like any good treaty, there's always issues. And so we are going to buy the Philippines off of Spain, but nobody asks the Philippines what they want to do, right? And so we have a controversy here because what do we do with the Philippines? We've bought them from Spain. Do we annex them to ourselves or do we leave them to self-govern? So the Treaty of Paris that had included that provision for acquiring the Philippines, the anti-imperialists are arguing that if we annex the Philippines, we are taking a heavily populated territory whose people are a different race and culture. And that violates our Declaration of Independence. So we should not be annexing them. They should be left to themselves because they're not like us. But the imperialists see it differently, and on February 6, 1899, the Treaty of Paris is ratified by the U.S. Congress by one vote over the 2/3 majority that is required for ratification. So we get a 57-27 vote, which passes this treaty and gives the Philippines to the U.S. as a territory. And of course, the people of the Philippines are outraged about this because the whole point of getting rid of Spain was to get independence, not to be a part of another country now. So all they did was trade one colonizer for the other. And so Emiliano Aguinaldo, who had fought alongside the U.S. troops to get rid of the Spanish, takes this as a personal insult, as he should. And he gets a band of guerrilla fighters together to attack the U.S. after the treaty is ratified because they've turned on him, right? And so the Filipino War for Independence is going to last over 3 years. The Philippines just didn't go quietly. It didn't just end when the Spanish left. There is a 3-year war between the U.S. and the Philippines where they want their country. The Filipino War for Independence is going to see 4,000 American deaths and 20,000 Filipino combat deaths. And the civilian death toll is going to be estimated to be over 250,000. So all of this talk of America coming in to help is out the window if you look at these numbers. And by 1901, Aguinaldo and his band have kind of lost influence over the Filipino people once William Howard Taft is appointed civil governor of the Philippines. And he begins to work with some Filipinos in efforts to disengage the American military from direct conflict. And he starts to work to improve life in the Philippines by building new transportation infrastructure, hospitals, and schools, which allows some of the Filipinos to leave Aguinaldo's force and kind of shift back to the person who's helping them. Because at the time, if you're dying, sometimes you have to do what you have to do to stay alive, right? But Aguinaldo is captured by the Americans. He is forced to swear allegiance to the U.S., and the Taft Commission is going to take over, and they're going to work to modernize life in the Philippines. Most reforms that include government appointments are to resistance leaders who have exchanged their role in the resistance for supporting America. They're saying if they support the Americans, they will be given a government job. It's the spoil system in the Philippines. And this is going to be how the Philippines is governed until July 4th, 1946, when we finally let them have their own nation back. And that is pretty much the end of the Spanish-American War. A splendid little war.